So, good evening. Thank you for coming to the Environmental Justice Study Group's final presentation, which is primarily for you to ask questions if you want, or discuss whatever. But it wouldn't be a presentation without slides, so be patient. This is a new position. It was the study was adopted at the last convention, and I think the most important. I didn't realize I was going to overlap this little phases. The important words are meaningful involvement, in my estimation, and we really pick up on the LWV-US position on public participation. The way we approached this, we began with a review of the positions and did not find anything that even came close to talking about environmental justice. Then we came up with a bunch of specific things that were in the news or whatnot, and individual study members researched different things. You can look at all of our individual reports, which are in all different formats, in the appendix to our report. But we went through the individual case studies and looked for commonalities. And from those commonalities, we drew our recommendations and the questions for consensus, and then took the consensus responses to develop the position. We had a good response rate. We had positive response. And I really want to thank all of the leagues that gave us comments, as well as making check marks. It's so much more helpful to know what your thinking was when you, even if you said you like, yes, we had consensus, knowing why helps. So the position in brief is, as you see, I can read it if you want, but I think you can probably read faster. And then the position in full, we wanted to start with an acknowledgement that we've got a history here. And we need to change operating procedures in this state in order to stop doing the same thing that we've been doing all along. The more we delved into it, the more we realized that the league's classic approach of air quality, water quality, and land use left out a lot of things that could make your life lovely or horrible. And we got from the late Representative McEachin the idea of cumulative impact. That in the past, every project has been permitted as though it were happening without anything else having happened to a particular place, which is very beneficial to the developer. And these specifics are somewhat drawn from the study that the Department of Environmental Quality commissioned for itself, which we found that we'd come to the same conclusions. The term environmental justice community is defined in the Code of Virginia. Here's the definition, which we didn't put into the position because, you know, it's long. But I think it boils down to there are specific guidelines around annual household income and around the percentage of population that is people of color. So the whole point of the 2 years we've spent on this is to be ready to advocate. The things we know are out there, all the things we studied are still lurking. In addition, Reggie, the state's Air Pollution Control Board just announced that they have a meeting and they will have a presentation on getting out of Reggie in early June. Another thing that we didn't actually study, but there's a study out there, is that Virginia has no regulations on above ground storage tanks as long as they don't store fuel. They can be the most toxic chemical on earth. As long as it's not fuel, they can do anything they want. And I attended a presentation to the State Environmental Justice Advisory Council, where the Department of Environmental Quality explained how they were going to do meaningful involvement. And I would call it a checkoff box. And of course, we have climate change. If you have other things, we would want to hear them. Other environmental justice issues and concerns. Somebody asked me in the last month or so about how we would be advocating, so I threw in a slide on that. And I understand that we're going to look to the future to the possibility of working with a legislator to actually draft legislation. In addition to what we always do. And so we are arrived at comments and questions. If you need to see any of the slides, say so. I know I galloped through them.
No, I have a question though, if you don't. On tree canopy. Tree canopy is, you know, everyone is hysterical about that in Arlington and I'm sure elsewhere. It was frankly kind of a new word to me a few years ago. But is that considered, I heard somebody say that is an environmental justice issue.
Yes. Definitely.
Okay. So because if you live in an area where there's no tree canopy, they might, what I'm trying to say is they might go into an area and say, you don't need tree canopy because this is not an area we deem worthy. Is that it?
Hey, Joan, if you want, I can speak to this, Carolyn, if you don't mind me jumping in. So there's a couple of issues here. What we're seeing in Arlington is a co-option of the real problem by anti-housing activists.
Right.
However, so the problem, if we're looking sort of at a more fundamental, is tied to the original development of cities and policies such as redlining. And so neighborhoods, for example, that were redlined and deemed poor investments, not only were people of color and low-income people shut out of acquiring housing in those neighborhoods, but those neighborhoods were not invested in for other kinds of development or services as well. So, for example, if you look at Richmond, Richmond is a great, and by great I mean terrible, example of looking at current heat islands in the city compared to the redlining maps from the mid-20th century, because those neighborhoods were not, available for mortgages, right? But also, which neighborhoods are like the quote unquote green, leafy, desirable neighborhoods. And today we're seeing the effects of that in terms of things like heat exposure and asthma incidents, because there's a lot of heat and bad air quality in these neighborhoods that have no trees. So in that case, there's a direct link between environmental justice and tree canopy. What we're seeing in Arlington and in a lot of areas where people are now we are veering into my personal opinion, just so you know, I'm not speaking for my employer or for anyone here. But basically people are saying like, we can't develop multifamily housing in areas that already have trees because we would be reducing the tree canopy that we already have.
Right, that's baloney.
That's, as you said, baloney, for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is that we now have much more, especially in places like Arlington, much more modern zoning and building codes that require certain mitigation efforts for stuff. But so I just wanted to make that clear so we're not like conflating these two issues. And in a lot of Virginia, the sort of intersection of redline neighborhoods and heat islands comes back to tree canopy, which is an important component of this stuff.
There's some figure it out. Anna's one of our study group.
There's a guy that you may know who works for the Science Museum of Virginia. His name is Jeremy Hoffman, who is like one of the leading experts in this area and has done like really like absolutely fabulous like pioneering citizen science efforts to measure like the differences in temperatures in neighborhoods that have a lot of trees and neighborhoods that don't, and like getting like kids from the neighborhoods to like ride around on their bikes with thermometers on hot days and like track how many more degrees it is in their neighborhoods versus in the rich neighborhoods, and stuff like that, which is very cool. Anyway, I'm a fan of his, but there's like a lot of stuff that is sort of rooted in Virginia in particular, where like a lot of the pioneering research on this issue has been based.
Well, no, thank you. I now that you explained it, it made sense that I hadn't thought of it as a justice issue. But yeah, if you're not planting the trees in the areas, then you get the heat zones. Thank you.
Well, there's actually two issues. Heat definitely in Arlington and Richmond and places like that, but in Norfolk, it's also a flooding issue, because trees sop up a certain amount of the water. And the more hard surface you have, the more pavement, the more runoff you have. So it's a double whammy. The trees would reduce flooding, pavement increases flooding.
Yeah, we learned that the hard way.
They both affect heat.
Yeah.
Don't worry, there's the anti-housing folks are saying that in Arlington too. You can't build taller buildings because that will increase impermeable surfaces in some way, despite the fact that the building footprints are exactly the same, and that they're tying that back to flooding, which
they'll tie anything to it just so they don't have to build.
But yeah, that's another super important point.
And while we were having fun with that, I want to mention also that Linda Rice is a member of the study group.
Yay. Does anybody else have any questions? You were so thorough in your presentation.
Or so fast that you couldn't think.
Susan,
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is a question or just a statement, but I'm concerned, and I'm sure you're also concerned about the situation where we get the courts that step in and they say, no, you've done it wrong, like the Wegman Center, where the Supreme Court said, no, you didn't take into consideration the community's concerns, and they send it back down the courts. But in the meantime, Wegmans continues to build the center. Could you hear me?
I'm having a little trouble following. I can hear you, but I'm
Well, I could just be inarticulate, so.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm familiar with what Susan's talking about. It was in Hanover County, I believe, wasn't it, Susan?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think the Board of Supervisors there were not exactly, shall we say, very sympathetic to the needs of the citizenry that were going to be near the site of this very large Wegmans store complex, I guess. And so I gathered, I'm not as familiar with the case as I am with some of the others, but from what I understand, and Susan, jump in. So then the citizenry, and I would imagine some other probably special interest groups kind of joined to bring this suit against, I don't know if it was against Wegmans or actually against the Board of Supervisors of Hanover. Maybe it was both, I don't know. And that's how this thing is kind of gotten more attention. But the fault really lies, I hate to say it, we had one comment about this, I think, in Carolyn's slide there. When they do these reviews, whether it's the planning staff for these communities, and even if these some of these proposals for development are sent, through the state, unfortunately, having worked in this area myself, unfortunately, some of the review processes are not as thorough as they should be. And I think, like we're pointing out, still presently, but certainly in the past, there was very little consideration for site planning, where you would have these, shall we say, communities who are of lower income, perhaps communities of color, and how they would be affected by these, by these projects. And now, over a period of time, as you know, which is one of the reasons the league has taken this up, finally there is more attention being paid to this, and finally our own DEQ has established I'm trying to think, a group, I guess, under the umbrella of the DEQ to consider environmental justice issues. But this is all relatively new for Virginia. And I think it's just unfortunate that we wind up seeing these cases go through litigation, I'm gonna say after the fact, when actually, if some of whether it's the planning staff or the reviewers at the DEQ level or whomever should have been more aware and probably more diligent in identifying the impacts that some of these projects were going to have, and unfortunately that does not always happen.
Yeah, I think that this goes back to what Carolyn was saying at the very beginning, calling out the attention to the engagement component of the proposed position, which is that so much of what constitutes environmental injustice or environmental justice is procedural justice, is not necessarily related to outcomes. So we think about like distributional justice, for example, which is like, is the money going to communities based on need versus based on who's the loudest, for example. but like procedural justice is such a huge component of this, which is like, does the community have a say in what's going to be happening there? So I think that that's a particularly important component of the position, to include that, you know, like the outcome, you know, maybe at the end of the day, there's still going to be whatever developed in a particular location. But if the community is involved from the get-go, like you said, in these permitting decisions, and whoever is in charge at the local government of engaging in like trust building with the communities and considers their needs and can, you know, implement different kinds of mitigation strategies to reduce the impact on the communities and stuff, if that's built in from the beginning and people are involved in the process, that's a lot closer to justice, right? Than
Yeah, I think
the courts coming down with the
I
decision.
think one of the problems, frankly, in the past has been the state has not been exactly very assertive in identifying these, you know, issues like this. You know, I hate to say it, but there has been, or I think historically, a lack of communication between, let's say, the planning guys who are getting these projects to review, and I'll say the environmental guys who may, you know, see snippets of this, you know, after the fact. And because the coordination is not the best, hopefully it's improving presently, but in the past, it certainly has not been very good. And so consequently, you have these projects going out, so to speak, with approval of the county staff or city staff or whatever it is, when in fact they really haven't given a lot of these projects the review they should. And then the other thing you have to worry about, and I know knows this, Carol, and a lot of you guys know this, the pressure that these elected officials, along with, I might add, the staff, get from these developers,
Yep.
is just really pretty phenomenal. And so, you know, they're getting pressure from the developers. And I would say fairly recently, are they really getting, as Susan Bivens is mentioning with the Wegman case, kind of this pushback from citizenry and saying, hey, wait a minute, you know,
But it's still a mess. I mean, isn't it still a mess though? I mean, it's still going on to what Susan said. It's still, I mean, because I just read it quickly. They threw it out. It was several Black homeowners who brought the suit saying that they were ruining their area. Then it was thrown out because they said they had no standing, which is crazy. And now the court came back and said they do have standing. But in the meantime, Wegmans is building away, apparently, from what I'm reading here. So that's not very good. But Judy, you had your hand up. I'm sorry.
Well, this is on a different topic, so we're done.
But it is an environmental justice issue to me, right?
Could I throw a couple more facts on this fire? And Mary Finley Brooke, who's been putting all these cool links in the chat, will correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe the General Assembly set up the Virginia Environmental Justice Advisory Council and simply said that the staff for it would be DEQ. And I attended a couple meetings virtually. One of the meetings, somebody from the state's, this was under the previous administration, somebody from the state's development department was like, I can only work with the information I'm given if Hanover County says this area is zoned for industrial, I'm going to go look for industry to recruit. Don't lie to me, he was saying in his essence. And apparently Hanover County deliberately zoned people's homes industrial, which is not that much different from the redlining and tree canopy issue. I mean, it's part of the same pattern.
Crazy.
is because this community was actually carved in half by a highway. It's a historic Black community that's freedman or freed person. It was carved by the highway going north. They have a landfill and airport and all other, burdens. And it's a major wetlands. And not only that, the way that they are permitting it, they have diesel backups. It's this massive distribution center for the whole East Coast. It's at a scale you wouldn't even believe. Something like 22 football fields, right? And when anything happens, their backup is diesel. So imagine trucks. I can't remember if it was 6 days a week or 7. And I think it was 7 that the trucks pull in and out through that historic Black community, getting all the diesel exhaust plus into their community, right? But also, if anything happens, all of that diesel backup that had no regulation, it was just once that first step went through, they were like, okay, you need a backup. Diesel is what you do. And there was even no search for solar or other. The whole process has been a sham, as you've all been saying. But it definitely is EJ, is what I was trying to say. If you actually listen to the narratives of the community and the way they've recorded their history from their founding, it's completely EJ. Like, there's no question there. I'm sure it will continue in the courts. So what you all were saying about the, ending up in litigation after the fact was totally true. Anyways, great job, you all.
It's crazy. Judy? Oh, sorry.
The other thing I wanted to mention is that I attended another Environmental Justice Advisory Council meeting on May 9th. And they were having a presentation from the Department of Environmental Quality on how they're going to do meaningful involvement. And it says the OEJ coordinators will, office, I guess, will reach out to their community contacts to gauge interest in proposed permits of concern in the following manner. A, if the community leaders, civic leaders, etc., living or representing the community do not express an interest or concern for the proposed permit action, the coordinator will document their findings from their environmental justice review and the initial outreach efforts to include with the permit application documentation. This will conclude the environmental justice review. Does that sound pretty perfunctory to you?
Yeah, so if you're not with it every minute of the day to follow everything your community is doing, every meeting, and you miss something, that's it. Yeah, that's crazy.
And we don't even know who their list of contacts is.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of those occasions when the US would sign treaties with indigenous peoples.
Yeah, and not have a clue it's in it. Man.
Anyway, I had to get that one off my chest. Now, Judy.
So this is a different topic, but at least in Northern Virginia, there's huge controversies about siting of data farms. And I don't know if there's a environmental justice part of that as well. It seems like it's sort of happening, out in the, maybe in the wealthier areas where people can, are more informed and get rise up in arms. But there's been a lot of controversy about that. Then there's also controversy about things like solar farms, and that takes up a lot of land to put up solar panels. And I wonder if there's an environmental justice for some of those proposals, some of those sites issues.
I think you need to remember that we have environmental and natural resources positions already. Not everything has to be an environmental justice issue. We can look at our land use issue. So, I mean, all of these positions can work together.
I actually think both those are in a lot of instances, and it really is looking again, as people were saying, at the procedural dynamics and who has power and what the agenda is. But the truth of the matter is those data centers were pushed out of the West Coast because there wasn't enough water. And they just came in and said, it's right on the Potomac River. without doing any assessment of water. And we know that even in the Potomac watershed, it's an issue of scarcity. So it's a distributional issue, but it's also a procedural issue. And they are wealthy communities, but not everybody's equally wealthy. There are some people who are being pushed off their land. So there's so many reasons. And the solar farms, yes, absolutely, such as Charles City. But also because in a lot of rural communities that have now said no to solar because they were treated so horribly, they are actually losing those benefits too. Like there could be community benefits, there could be income from community solar or distributed solar. So not only are they being mistreated by the solar farms, and they really are, and the University of Richmond is the absolute worst case, which I'm going in to talk to my provost about on Friday again. But it is definitely EJ. I wanted to bring up one more issue and then I'll stop talking. Everything you were talking about is very much true historically with DEQ, and it's a total mess. And what Carolyn was saying, it's so much worse because DEQ was not originally at the head, and we fought for 3 years, and the original bylaws did not have DEQ at the head, and they were able to kind of push people out of the way and to make sure all of their staff have no power. But beyond that, Youngkin's administration has put out EJ standards. I don't know how many of you were able to comment. The comments just went in. I was part of the comment that went in with the Southern Environmental Law Center and a lot of other community organizations, including Brown Grove, which is the Wegmans impacted community. And what they're trying to do is make these very rudimentary maps that say like, you're an EJ community and you're not an EJ community, and kind of define without very much community involvement and with some very unclear and very scary parameters. So just thinking about moving forward in a very different landscape than the last two administrations, which were awful on environmental justice. We are in a whole new situation, and our NGOs don't fight back the same way. They tend not to fight back, which is why your role, I think, is even more important than it might have been in the past administration. All right, I'll be quiet.
Mary is going to not be quiet at the convention. She's one of our breakout speakers. And as far as the data centers go, we've got impervious surface runoff issues. We've got high consumption of electricity issues. There's all the fun and games around generators. Have you been following that?
You know, a lot high consumption of water too.
And,
Mentioned, you know, came east because there was supposedly
Right.
lots of water here, and the noise, you know, the 24/7 noise.
If you're not familiar with Ivy Main's blog, Power to the People, I highly recommend it. She's frequent columnist in the Virginia Mercury too. And her specialty is energy issues.
What's her name again?
Ivy, like ivy growing up the wall.
Yeah.
Main, like a water main.
Okay. Thank you.
I didn't think to have the link handy.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, she's with the Sierra Club. She does quite a bit with the Sierra Club. So if any of you are members of the Sierra Club, the Virginia chapters or whatever, the Sierra Club has Virginia chapters newsletters, and you'll often see her column in the Sierra Club newsletters, along with Virginia Mercury, I guess.
I can see chat now. I love it, Anna. Is there any part of the position that you want more explanation about, or is it all pretty clear?
Seems pretty clear to me.
Thank you.
No, you guys, like the other groups, did an amazing job of defining a very hard, as you can tell, topic. You know, Um,
Can I ask a question? Carolyn, I guess, have you seen, this I'm sure has been a problem for years, if not generations, but is there a distinctive difference between the attitude of this administration versus the previous 2, even 3 administrations, both Republican and Democratic?
I was going to say night and day, but I think it was a very cloudy day.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the previous administration, somewhat like the current federal administration, on the one hand, they do something good for the environment, and you blink and they've done something. You said, what? That's your idea of addressing climate change? Let's have some more oil. You know, it's a, you've got back and forth on one side, and you've got I don't know what you're calling on the other side.
Yeah.
Though I suppose when it comes down to it, those small modular nuclear reactors, at least they won't put carbon emissions out.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to having them here in Southwest Virginia, that's for sure.
I can understand. And I'm also concerned that if they do build them, we'll get renewed pressure to mine Coles Hill.
Yeah, right.
I mean, you know, we've got the world's biggest uranium deposit.
Mhm. Yep.
like you got it covered, kiddo.
Now, you all got to come to the convention and stand up and say, we like this position.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate your hard work. Bye-bye.